A surgeon's hands, steady enough to mend a child's heart, began to tremble, not from fatigue, but from pure, unadulterated rage. Dr. Alani Davis stood at Gate B24 of JFK's Terminal 4, her ticket in hand, her destination, a San Francisco operating room, where a 7-year-old boy's life hung in the balance. But a gate agent armed with a measuring tape and a chillingly calm demeanor had just become the arbiter of that child's fate. She was denied boarding. What followed was not just an argument, but a cascade of events that in less than 12 hours would drag the multi-billion-dollar airline, its CEO, and that very gate agent into a federal courtroom facing a judge who had little patience for injustice. This is the story of how one woman's fight for her dignity became a corporate nightmare. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 hummed with a familiar organized chaos. It was a symphony of rolling luggage wheels, garbled final boarding calls, and the faint, sweet smell of Cinnabon clashing with the sterile scent of floor cleaner. For Dr. Alani Davis, it was just background noise. Her focus was a laser cutting through the distractions towards one singular goal, Global Wings Air Flight 815 to San Francisco, departing at 8:50 p.m. Alani was a pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon, a profession that demanded impossible precision and a level of calm that bordered on inhuman. She lived her life in millimeters and milliseconds. Today, those metrics were more critical than ever. In a hospital bed at UCSF, Benioff Children's Hospital, a 7-year-old boy named Leo miles away was waiting for a highly complex arterial switch operation. His case was unique, a ticking clock, and Alani was the only surgeon on the West Coast with the specific experience to perform it. She had been at a conference in New York, presenting a paper when the call came. The surgery was moved up. She had to be there. She arrived at Gate B24 with 40 minutes to spare a model of efficiency. She was dressed in comfortable but professional travel attire, dark trousers, a silk blouse, and a blazer. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. In one hand, she pulled a standard carry-on suitcase. In the other, she carried a leather satchel. This satchel was her lifeline. It contained not just her laptop and personal items, but also detailed surgical plans for Leo pre-op scans and custom-printed 3D models of his tiny, malformed heart. It never left her side. The boarding process began, and Alani joined the Priority Group 2 line. When her turn came, she smiled at the gate agent, a woman with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read, Brenda. "Good evening," Alani said, holding out her boarding pass. Brenda didn't look up. Her eyes were fixed on Alani's luggage. "You have 2 items. Only one carry-on is permitted in the cabin, plus a personal item that must fit under the seat in front of you." "Yes, of course," Alani replied calmly. "The roller bag for the overhead. And this is my personal item." She indicated the leather satchel. Brenda's eyes narrowed. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the satchel. "That looks too large to be a personal item. Please place it in the sizer." The metal baggage sizer stood beside the counter, like a small cage. Alani had traveled hundreds of times with this exact bag. It had always fit, albeit snugly, under every airline seat she'd ever encountered. Still, policy was policy. She walked over and slid the satchel into the sizer. It was tight. The leather was supple, and with a gentle push, it would have gone in completely. But she was hesitant to force it, given the delicate 3D models inside. The top half-inch of the bag remained above the metal bars. "See," Brenda said, her voice laced with a triumphant, almost gleeful tone. "It doesn't fit. You'll have to check it." Alani's professional calm began to fray. "I can't check this bag," she stated, her voice even but firm. "It contains sensitive medical equipment and documents for a critical surgery I am performing tomorrow morning. It cannot leave my possession." "Ma'am, airline policy is very clear," Brenda recited her voice, a monotone drone that suggested this was a speech she'd given 1,000 times. If it doesn't fit in the sizer, it must be checked. No exceptions. There have to be exceptions for medical necessities. Alani countered her frustration, growing. I am a surgeon. This is for a child's heart surgery. Surely you can understand. Brenda stared at her, her expression blank. Everyone has a story, ma'am. I need to see your bag fit, or you need to check it. We have a flight to board. Alani glanced around. A man in a crumpled suit just ahead of her had a duffel bag slung over his shoulder that was visibly larger than her satchel. He had been waved through without a second glance. A woman behind her was struggling with a massive tote bag overflowing with magazines and a laptop, an item that would have failed the sizer test spectacularly. Brenda hadn't said a word to them. The injustice of it hit Alani like a physical blow. It was a familiar, sickening feeling. The selective enforcement of rules, the subtle or not-so-subtle shift in tone. She was a black woman, a doctor, a professional at the top of her field, yet in this moment she was being reduced to a problem, an obstacle. "Can I please speak to your supervisor?" Alani asked, keeping her voice as level as she could. Brenda sighed dramatically, a theatrical display of exasperation. She picked up a phone. "Mark, I have a passenger at B124 who is refusing to comply with baggage policy." A few minutes later, Mark Jenkins arrived. He was a man in his mid-40s with a tired, corporate smile plastered on his face. He listened to Brenda's one-sided account, then turned to Alani. "Dr. Davis, is it?" he said, glancing at her boarding pass. "I'm Mark, the station manager. I understand there's an issue with your bag." Alani repeated her situation, this time emphasizing the urgency. "The contents of this bag are irreplaceable and directly related to a life-saving surgery on a child. Checking it is not an option. It could be lost, damaged, or delayed. I am legally and ethically responsible for these materials." Mark's smile didn't waver. It was a shield. "I appreciate that, Doctor. I really do. But we have FAA regulations and company policies we must adhere to. They are in place for the safety and comfort of all our passengers. If Brenda says the bag is too large, then I have to trust her judgment. It's not her judgment, it's her prejudice." Alani said the words, slipping out sharper than she intended. "She hasn't measured anyone else's bag. Look at the bags of the people who have already boarded. I assure you, mine is not the largest." Mark's smile finally tightened. "Ma'am, let's not make accusations. This is a simple matter of policy. You can either check the bag, or we can book you on a later flight, where perhaps you can make other arrangements for your medical equipment." A later flight. The words echoed in her head. The surgery was at 7 a.m. This was the last flight that would get her to San Francisco with enough time to prep. A later flight meant a cancelled surgery. A later flight meant little Leo might not get his chance. There is no later flight. Alani said, her voice now dangerously low. "I need to be on this plane. Then you need to check the bag," Mark said, his tone shifting from placating to final. He folded his arms. "We are on a tight schedule. What is your decision?" Alani looked from his intransigent face to Brenda's smug expression. She looked at the line of passengers, staring at her, some with sympathy, others with annoyance. She felt a profound sense of helplessness wash over her. They held all the power. They had the uniforms, the policies, the authority to simply say, "No." "This is unbelievable," she whispered more to herself than to them. "Final call for Global Wings. Air Flight 815 to San Francisco." Brenda announced into the microphone, her eyes still on Alani. All ticketed passengers should be on board. Tears of pure fury pricked at Alani's eyes. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of them. "You are interfering with a medical emergency," she said, her voice shaking with controlled rage. "Your decision, Dr. Mark Prest." Alani stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. What could she do? 'Cause a scene, get arrested, nothing would get her on that plane. She had been defeated by a metal cage and a woman's arbitrary whim. With a heavy heart, she watched as the last passenger scurried down the jet bridge. Brenda walked over to the gate door, gave Alani one last dismissive look, and began to close it. The heavy, final click of the latch echoed in the suddenly quiet terminal. Flight 815 was gone, and Dr. Alani Davis was left standing there, holding a bag full of a child's hope, with nowhere to go. The roar of the Boeing 737's engines taxiing away from the gate was a visceral sound of failure. Alani sank onto a nearby bench, the adrenaline that had been coursing through her veins evaporating into a cold, heavy dread. Her hands were trembling now. She pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling, as she dialed the number for the head surgical nurse at UCSF. "Sharon, it's Alani. I'm not on the plane." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with disbelief. Alani explained the situation, her voice cracking, despite her best efforts to remain clinical. She could hear the quiet panic in Sharon's voice as she promised to call the chief of surgery to see what could be done. But they both knew the reality. There were no other flights. The intricate dance of scheduling an operating room, an anesthesiology team, a post-op ICU bed, it was a house of cards. Removing one piece meant the whole thing collapsed. She hung up the weight of her failure pressing down on her. It wasn't just about the injustice or the humiliation. It was about Leo. She pictured his small, trusting face, his parents who had placed all their faith in her, and she had been stopped by Brenda and her sizer. As she sat there, head in her hands, a tentative voice broke through her despair. "Excuse me, Dr. Davis." Alani looked up. A young woman, likely in her late 20s, stood before her. She had kind eyes, fiery red hair, pulled back in a messy ponytail, and was dressed in jeans and a hoodie from a well-known law school. She clutched a worn copy of a textbook on constitutional law. "I'm Sarah Klein," the woman said, shifting her weight nervously. "I was in line behind you. I saw everything that happened. I'm a lawyer. Well, almost. I'm a third-year law student, clerking for a federal judge this semester. What they did to you was wrong. It was more than wrong. I think it was illegal." Alani looked at her, weary and skeptical. "What does it matter? The plane is gone." "It matters," Sarah insisted, her nervousness giving way to a spark of conviction. "It's a violation of the airline's own contract of carriage, for one. They have to provide accommodation for medical devices. But more than that, it felt like selective enforcement. It looked like racial profiling. I recorded some of it on my phone." Alani's head snapped up. "You what?" discreetly Sarah assured her. "I started recording when the supervisor Mark arrived. I got his whole speech about policy while he ignored the man with the giant duffel bag walking right past him. It's not perfect, but it's something." A tiny flicker of hope ignited in Alani's chest. For the first time in an hour, she felt like she wasn't completely alone. "Okay, Sarah Klein," Alani said, sitting up straighter. "I appreciate you stopping. But what can we possibly do now? It's after 9 p.m. in New York. The airline has won. They've closed the door." "Maybe not," Sarah said, her mind clearly racing. Airlines are common carriers subject to federal regulation. What they did falls under federal jurisdiction. The judge I clerk for, he's not him. I mean the one I work for directly. But my boss's husband, Judge Daniel Joseph, he's known as a stickler for civil rights. He's tough old school, and he despises corporate overreach. He's also famous for being a night owl. Alani stared at her. "You want to call a federal judge at home? On a weeknight, no. Sarah said with a grin. "I want to call my direct boss, his clerk, who is also his protégé, and have him call the judge. We can't just let them do this. You have a child waiting for you. That elevates this from a customer service complaint to a public interest crisis." The audacity of it was staggering. It was a 1-in-a-million shot, a desperate Hail Mary. But it was better than sitting on a bench in JFK, drowning in defeat. What would we even ask for, Alani asked. An emergency injunction. Sarah said the legal terms flowing easily. We'd file a motion for a temporary restraining order. We'd argue that Global Wings Air, by unlawfully denying you boarding, is causing irreparable harm, not just to your reputation, but to the health and life of your patient. We would ask the judge to compel the airline to remedy the situation immediately, to get you to San Francisco, by any means necessary. The phrase "by any means necessary" hung in the air. For the next hour, the sterile airport bench became their makeshift war room. Zara, with a fire Alani hadn't seen in lawyers twice her age, began making calls. Her first was to her supervising clerk, a man named David Chen. Alani could only hear Sarah's side of the conversation. "David, it's Sarah." "Yes, I know it's late. I'm at JFK and I just witnessed something I can't ignore." "Dr. Alani Davis, pediatric surgeon." "Yes, that's what I said. They denied her boarding. She's missing a critical heart surgery on a child. The pretext was a carry-on bag." "David, it was blatant. I have video. Yes, I think we have grounds." Judge Joseph. "I know it's insane, but he's the only one who would even consider a hearing on this short notice. Irreparable harm is not an abstract concept here, David. It's a 7-year-old's heart. Please, just make the call." There was a long pause. Alani held her breath. Sarah's face was a mask of intense concentration. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you, David. I'm sending you my video and a 1-page summary now. Her name is Dr. Alani Davis. The airline is Global Wings Air." She hung up and looked at Alani, her eyes shining. "He's in. David is a pit bull. He's drafting the motion now. He said Judge Joseph is usually up reading until 2 a.m. He's going to call the judge's chambers and get the message to his personal line. He thinks the video is the key. The next 90 minutes were a blur of frenetic activity." David called back for more details. Alani forwarded him her ticket confirmation, a copy of her medical license, and a non-confidential summary of Leo's case provided by the hospital. Each piece of information was a bullet being loaded into a legal rifle. Around 11:30 p.m. Sarah's phone buzzed. It was David. She put it on speaker. "Sarah Alani, you there?" David's voice was crisp and energized. "We're here," they said in unison. "Okay, I just got off the phone with Judge Joseph himself," David said, and Alani felt her heart leap into her throat. He was not pleased. I've never heard him use that tone. "He watched your video, Sarah. He read Dr. Davis's declaration. He's granting an ex parte emergency hearing." When Sarah breathed. Now David replied, "We're doing it via a secure video conference. He's at his home study. He wants to hear directly from Dr. Davis. But that's not all. He's issuing a summons. He's ordering representatives of Global Wings Air, including the station manager Mark Jenkins and the gate agent Brenda." David paused for dramatic effect. "To appear in his courtroom, at the federal courthouse in Brooklyn. Tomorrow morning, at 9 a.m. sharp." Alani was speechless. A few hours ago, she was just another traveler, wronged by an airline. Now the gears of the federal judiciary were grinding into motion on her behalf in the middle of the night. "Get some rest if you can," David advised. "You're due in court in less than 10 hours. And Dr. Davis." The judge's last words to me were, "Tell that doctor to be prepared to fly tomorrow, one way or another." Judge Daniel Joseph sat in his leather wingback chair, the soft glow of a green banker's lamp illuminating the stacks of books and legal briefs that covered his mahogany desk. His home study in Brooklyn Heights was his sanctuary, a fortress of jurisprudence and quiet contemplation. At 72, with a shock of white hair and eyes that had seen the very best and worst of humanity, he was a man who believed the law was not merely a set of rules, but a shield for the powerless against the powerful. The late-night call from his top clerk's protégé, David Chen, had been an unwelcome but intriguing intrusion. Joseph valued his clerks. He trusted their judgment. If David was calling him at 11 p.m. about an incident at the airport, it was not trivial. He had listened his expression impassive as David laid out the facts. Then David had emailed him the short video clip. Judge Joseph clicked it open on his laptop. The audio was slightly muffled by airport noise, but the visuals were damningly clear. He saw Dr. Alani Davis, a woman of color, composed and articulate, explaining her predicament. He saw the airline supervisor, Mark Jenkins, with his plastic smile and condescending tone. And crucially, he saw in the background of the shot a white man in a business suit stride past with a carry-on that was flagrantly oversized without so much as a glance from the airline staff. Joseph watched it twice. It was the casual, almost bored nature of the discrimination that incensed him. This wasn't a heated confrontation that had escalated. This was a quiet, systemic exercise of power, wielded by a low-level employee and backed by a mid-level manager that could have catastrophic life-or-death consequences hundreds of miles away. It was everything he despised. Irreparable harm, Joseph had grunted into the phone to David. It's the textbook definition. A child's life isn't something you can compensate with a flight voucher. He had made his decision in an instant. This was not a matter for lengthy briefs and discovery. This was a matter for a judicial thunderclap. After a brief, direct video call with a weary but impressively composed Dr. Davis, in which she confirmed the facts under oath, Judge Joseph went to work. With David Chen on the line to transcribe and format, the judge began to dictate. His voice, usually calm and measured in the courtroom, was now hard as granite. In the United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York, he began. Case number 1, 25 CV 1009901. Dr. Alani Davis, plaintiff, versus Global Wings Air Inc., defendant. Order to show cause and temporary restraining order. He laid out the preliminary injunction. Global Wings Air was to be immediately restrained from preventing Dr. Davis from traveling to San Francisco. But that wasn't enough. Justice delayed was justice denied, and for little Leo, any delay was a potential death sentence. Furthermore, he dictated, his voice dropping, "It is hereby ordered that defendant Global Wings Air Inc. shall appear before this court on October 3rd, 2025 at 9:00 a.m. in courtroom 4D of the Theodore Roosevelt Federal Courthouse, 225, Cadman Plaza, East Brooklyn, New York." He wasn't just summoning the faceless corporation, he wanted the people responsible. The defendant's representatives shall include, but are not limited to, the corporate counsel of record, the John F. Kennedy International Airport Station manager, identified as Mark Jenkins, and the gate agent, identified as Brenda. What was her last name, Mr. Chen? "We don't have it, Your Honor. Just Brenda from her name tag. Then she shall be identified as Jane Doe, Brenda. The airline will know who she is. They are ordered to produce her. Failure to appear will be considered contempt of this court." The final order was drafted, signed electronically with the judge's cryptographic key, and filed on the court's electronic system at 12:47 a.m. A U.S. Marshal was tasked with serving the order. Meanwhile, in a glass and steel skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan, Richard Sterling, the Executive Vice President and General Counsel for Global Wings Air, was asleep in his penthouse apartment. Sterling was a titan of corporate law, a man who saw legal challenges not as matters of justice, but as hostile takeover bids on his company's balance sheet. He was ruthless, arrogant, and extremely effective. His phone buzzed on his nightstand at 1:15 a.m. It was the dedicated line from the airline's 24/7 operations center. It only rang for emergencies, a crash, a hijacking, or a massive system failure. "What is it?" he barked into the phone. "Mr. Sterling, this is Tom from the GOC. We've just been served." "Served with what lawsuit?" "Send it to litigation in the morning." "Sir, it's not that simple. A U.S. Marshal just physically delivered a federal court order to our JFK station manager's office. It's an emergency summons from a Judge Daniel Joseph. We're ordered to appear in his courtroom in Brooklyn at 9 a.m. That's less than 8 hours from now." Sterling was suddenly wide awake, sitting bolt upright in his bed. "Judge Joseph, are you serious? On what grounds?" "It concerns a passenger, a Dr. Alani Davis, who was denied boarding on Flight 815 tonight." Sterling felt a surge of disbelief, followed by a hot flash of anger. "You're telling me I'm being dragged out of bed because some disgruntled passenger complained over a baggage dispute? This is insane. This is a gross abuse of judicial power. So the order names you or corporate counsel, as well as the station manager, Mark Jenkins, and the gate agent, Brenda Kowalski. And sir, the order is a TRO. It says we have to show cause why we shouldn't be compelled to transport Dr. Davis to San Francisco immediately." Sterling's legal mind, sharp, even when woken from a deep sleep, began to spin. Joseph. He knew the name. A judicial activist, a crusader. This wasn't a standard lawsuit. This was a targeted strike. Joseph wouldn't have done this without something compelling. "Get me Jenkins and this Kowalski woman on a conference call." Now Sterling commanded, swinging his legs out of bed and heading for his home office. "And get our CEO, James Harrington, on the line. Wake him up. Tell him we have a federal emergency. And find out everything you can about this Dr. Alani Davis. I want to know where she went to medical school, what she had for breakfast, and if she's ever had a single unpaid parking ticket. Dig. We're going to paint this woman as a disruptive, entitled passenger who is abusing the system." As Richard Sterling began his counterattack, he had no idea about the video. He had no idea about the child waiting for surgery. He simply saw a challenge to his authority and his company's dominance, and he intended to crush it. The battle lines were drawn. The courtroom awaited. By 3:00 a.m., the 54th floor conference room at Global Wings Air Headquarters had been transformed into a legal war room. The stunning panoramic views of a sleeping New York City were ignored. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and rising panic. Richard Sterling, now impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit and power-red tie, paced in front of a massive video screen. On the screen were the weary, terrified faces of Mark Jenkins and Brenda Kowalski, patched in from a small office at JFK. Seated at the polished conference table was James Harrington, the airline's CEO, a man whose silver hair and tailored suit couldn't hide the deep-set fatigue and fury in his eyes. "Let me get this straight," Harrington said, his voice a low growl. "We are in this position, facing a federal judge in 6 hours because of a carry-on bag. It was over policy." Sir Mark Jenkins stammered from the screen. The bag did not comply. The passenger became difficult. Sterling jabbed a finger towards the screen. "Mark, difficult is a subjective term. I need specifics. Was she loud? Did she use profanity? Did she threaten anyone?" "Well, no, not exactly," Mark admitted, shifting uncomfortably. "She was very insistent. She kept talking about being a doctor about a surgery. But we hear stories like that all the time. If we made an exception for her, and you, Brenda Sterling, cut in, turning his attention to the gate agent whose face was pale and drawn. Describe the interaction for me. From the beginning. Brenda recounted her version of the events, painting Alani as demanding and unreasonable from the outset. She emphasized that she was just doing her job, following the rules that had been drilled into her during training. The sizer is the rule, she repeated like a mantra. It either fits or it doesn't. Did you put anyone else's bag in the sizer? Sterling pressed. There was a slight hesitation. I don't recall specifically. It was a full flight. I used my discretion. Her bag looked larger than a standard personal item. Sterling knew this was a weak point. Discretion was a word that lawyers for the other side loved to pick apart. This is a shakedown. Harrington seethed, slamming his palm on the table. This doctor, probably some ambulance chaser, gets denied, finds a friendly judge, and now they're trying to squeeze us for a payday. It's extortion. It's more dangerous than that, James Sterling corrected him. Judge Joseph isn't interested in a settlement. He's interested in making a point. He's an ideologue. This isn't about money for him. It's about power. He wants to publicly humiliate us. An associate from Sterling's law firm, a young man named Peterson, who had been furiously typing on a laptop, cleared his throat. Sirs, I have something on Dr. Davis. All eyes turned to him. She's legit, Peterson said, looking almost disappointed. More than legit. She's one of the top pediatric cardiothoracic specialists in the country. Graduated top of her class from Johns Hopkins Medical School. Fellowship at the Cleveland Clinic. Her work on neonatal heart valve reconstruction is groundbreaking. There are articles about her in medical journals. She's clean, no lawsuits, no disciplinary actions, not even a speeding ticket we can find. He paused, then added the detail that made the room go cold, and we cross-referenced with UCSF Benioff. There is a 7-year-old patient named Leo Petrov, scheduled for a high-risk arterial switch operation at 7 a.m. Pacific time. The surgeon of record is Dr. Alani Davis. The CEO, James Harrington, let out a string of expletives. The narrative of the entitled disruptive passenger had just evaporated. They weren't dealing with a crank, they were dealing with a saint, and they had just blocked her from saving a child's life. Richard Sterling, however, was unflappable. A bad set of facts was just a more challenging puzzle to solve. Okay, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. This changes the optics, not the legal strategy. The core of our argument remains the same. We are a federally regulated entity, bound by safety protocols. Our employees on the ground followed those protocols. We cannot have a system where passengers can bypass security and baggage rules by claiming a personal emergency. That would create chaos and a genuine safety risk. He turned back to the screen. Mark Brenda. Your story is simple, and you will not deviate from it. You are dedicated employees who were faced with a non-compliant bag. You offered the passenger reasonable alternatives, checking the bag or taking a later flight. She refused. You acted professionally and without prejudice at all times. The fact that she is a doctor is irrelevant to the enforcement of federal airline policy. Do you understand? They both nodded mutely. Good, Sterling said. Our narrative is this Global Wings Air regrets Dr. Davis's personal situation, but we cannot and will not compromise on our safety and operational policies, which are applied to all passengers equally. We will portray her lawsuit as an attempt to use her laudable profession to demand special treatment that others are not afforded. It was a risky strategy. It required them to attack the credibility and motives of a surgeon on her way to save a child. but it was the only play they had. And what about the kid Harrington asked, the one variable he couldn't control? Sterling's expression was grim. We pray the hospital finds another surgeon. If that child suffers any harm, our exposure in a civil suit would be catastrophic. But that's a problem for another day. Today's problem is Judge Joseph. We need to go into that courtroom and win. We need to make this injunction go away. Be prepared. It's going to be a bloodbath. As dawn broke over the city, the team from Global Wings Air prepared for war. They were armed with legal precedent corporate talking points and a carefully constructed narrative of diligence and professionalism. They were a billion-dollar giant ready to bring their full weight to bear on a single delayed passenger. They felt confident, prepared, and entirely oblivious to the one piece of evidence that would bring their entire defense crashing down around them. The Theodore Roosevelt Federal Courthouse was an imposing limestone monolith, a building designed to project the gravity and unassailable power of the U.S. government. Courtroom 4D was a cavernous space paneled in dark, polished wood that seemed to absorb all sound. The air was cool and still. High above, the Great Seal of the United States was carved into the wall behind the judge's bench. It was an arena built for consequence. Alani Davis sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Sarah Klein and her boss, David Chen. Sarah, who had been a bundle of nervous energy all morning, now looked surprisingly calm, her files laid out in a neat, orderly stack. David, a seasoned litigator, despite his youth, radiated a quiet confidence. Alani, however, felt a tremor in her hands that she couldn't quell. This was an alien environment. In her world, the operating room, she was in complete control. Here she was, a supplicant, her fate in the hands of strangers. She kept picturing Leo, his small chest, prepped for an incision that might now never come. At precisely 8:55 a.m., the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Richard Sterling strode in, flanked by a team of 3 other lawyers from his firm. He moved with the predatory grace of a shark, his expensive suit a suit of armor. He radiated an aura of absolute confidence. Behind him, looking small and lost, were Mark Jenkins and Brenda Kowalski. Brenda's face was ashen. She avoided making eye contact with anyone, her gaze fixed on the floor. They took their seats at the defendant's table. Sterling gave Alani's team a brief, dismissive nod, a silent communication that they were amateurs about to be schooled by a master. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, a bailiff's voice boomed through the silence. All rise. Judge Daniel Joseph emerged from his chambers. He was even more imposing in person. He wasn't a large man, but he carried himself with an immense gravitas that filled the room. He settled into his high-backed chair, his black robes flowing around him, and scanned the courtroom over the top of his reading glasses. His gaze lingered for a moment on the team from Global Wings Air, his expression unreadable. "Be seated," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This court is in session. We are here on the matter of Davis versus Global Wings Air Incorporated. Case number 1, 25 CV Zilzo 921. This is a hearing to show cause regarding a temporary restraining order. Mr. Sterling, I assume you are representing the defendant. I am. Your Honor." Sterling said, rising smoothly to his feet. "Richard Sterling for Global Wings Air. And while we respect the court's authority, we must begin by lodging a formal objection to the highly irregular nature and timing of these proceedings. An ex parte order of this magnitude issued in the middle of the night over what is at its core a baggage dispute is an unprecedented judicial overreach." Judge Joseph stared at Sterling, unmoved. "Your objection is noted for the record, Mr. Sterling. It is also overruled. The plaintiff's motion alleged the potential for immediate and irreparable harm. I found the allegation credible. That is why we are here. So let's dispense with the procedural complaints and get to the heart of the matter. Mr. Chen, you may begin." David Chen rose. His approach was the opposite of Sterling's. He was calm, factual, and deferential. He briefly laid out the sequence of events, Doctor. Alani Davis, a renowned surgeon, was en route to perform a time-sensitive life-saving surgery on a child. She was denied boarding by Global Wings Air, based on a baggage rule that was, he argued, applied in a discriminatory and arbitrary manner. Your Honor, the harm here is not to Dr. Davis's travel plans, but to the life of a 7-year-old boy in San Francisco who, as we speak, is being prepared for a surgery that may not happen because the specialist for the job is sitting in this courtroom. Sterling was on his feet again. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is being overly dramatic and speculative. The plaintiff's profession, while noble, does not grant her immunity from FAA-mandated airline policies. I will be the judge of what is dramatic, Mr. Sterling, Joseph said, flatly. Sit down. Sterling sat, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. David continued. We are asking the court to compel Global Wings Air to remedy the harm they have caused, to honor their duty as a common carrier and transport Dr. Davis to San Francisco immediately so she can perform her duty as a doctor. When it was Sterling's turn, he was a whirlwind of corporate confidence. He painted a picture of a massive, complex operation where rules and policies were the bedrock of safety. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth and reasonable. Global Wings Air transports over 200,000 passengers safely every single day. We do this through the uniform and consistent application of our policies. These aren't our suggestions. They are rules, many rooted in FAA regulations. What Dr. Davis was asking for was special treatment. She was asking for one employee, a gate agent, to ignore her training and make a personal exception that could have implications for the safety and comfort of 300 other passengers on that aircraft. He gestured towards Brenda and Mark. These employees are not executives. They are hard-working people on the front lines, tasked with the difficult job of enforcing these rules fairly. Ms. Kowalski used the objective tool provided to her, the baggage sizer. The bag didn't fit. Mr. Jenkins, her supervisor, supported her decision. They offered Dr. Davis the standard reasonable accommodation, check the bag, or take a later flight. She refused both. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. We are sympathetic to Dr. Davis's situation, deeply, but our legal obligation is to the safety and security of the flight as a whole. We cannot operate an airline based on the personal stories of our passengers, however compelling they may be. We must operate based on policy. These employers did their job. Nothing more, nothing less. It was a powerful argument, delivered with polish and conviction. It was the sound of corporate reason, of logistical necessity. Alani felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. He made it all sound so reasonable. He had stripped the humanity from the situation, reducing it to a flowchart of rules and procedures. Judge Joseph listened intently, his fingers steepled in front of him. When Sterling finished, the judge turned his gaze not to the lawyers but to Brenda Kowalski. Ms. Kowalski, the judge said, his voice suddenly soft, but carrying an unmistakable command. Please take the witness stand. A wave of panic washed over Brenda's face. Richard Sterling stood to object, but Joseph cut him off with a single sharp glance. This was his courtroom, and the real drama was just about to begin. Brenda Kowalski walked to the witness stand as if she were walking to her own execution. Her hands trembled as the bailiff administered the oath. She sat down, clutching the armrests of the witness chair. Richard Sterling gave her a small, reassuring nod, a silent reminder of the morning's coaching session. Judge Joseph leaned forward, his demeanor shifting from that of a referee to that of a forensic examiner. "Ms. Kowalski, I want you to tell me about your job. What is the primary purpose of the carry-on baggage policy? Safety, Your Honor, Brenda," recited her voice thin. "And to ensure there's enough space for everyone's bags and that the boarding process is efficient. A laudable goal," the judge said. "Now tell me about your interaction with Dr. Davis. You stopped her because you believed her bag was too large to be a personal item. Is that correct, yes?" "Your Honor." "It looked oversized to my eye." "To your eye," the judge repeated slowly. "So it was a subjective judgment call on your part to ask her to use the sizer." "Yes, but the sizer is objective," Brenda said, clinging to her key defense. "It either fits or it doesn't." "Indeed," Joseph mused. "Dr. Davis has stated that her bag has fit under the seat on hundreds of previous flights. The leather is soft. Is it possible that with a slight compression it would have fit the sizer?" "She didn't try to compress it," Brenda said quickly. "She just slid it in and it stopped. And at that point, you told her she had to check it." "No other options were presented, despite her explaining the sensitive, irreplaceable medical contents inside. I offered her a later flight," Brenda said defensively. "That's the standard alternative." Richard Sterling was pleased. Brenda was sticking to the script. She sounded firm, if a little nervous. She was portraying herself as a diligent employee, not a malicious actor. Judge Joseph paused, peering at Brenda over his glasses. "Ms. Kowalski in the 30 minutes of the boarding process for flight 8415. How many other passengers did you ask to use?" The sizer Brenda hesitated. This was the question Sterling had warned her about. I don't recall the exact number. I use my professional judgment." "Try to recall," the judge pressed his voice, gentle but insistent. "Was it 5-10? Just give me your best estimate. Maybe one or two others." "It was a very busy flight." "One or two others," Joseph echoed. "And Dr. Davis, out of a plane that holds over 300 people. You must have a very well-trained eye for oversized bags." He let the silence hang in the air for a moment before turning to the plaintiff's table. "Mr. Chen, do you have any questions for the witness?" David Chen stood up. "No questions for this witness, Your Honor. However, we would like to call a rebuttal witness." Sterling shot to his feet. "Objection. They provided no witness list." "It is not a witness, Mr. Sterling," David said calmly. "It is a piece of evidence. Your Honor, at this time, we would like to present a video marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit A." A technician wheeled a large monitor to the center of the courtroom. Sterling looked at his team, bewildered. "What video?" "This video was taken by Ms. Sarah Klein during the events in question," David explained. "It begins at the point where Supervisor Mark Jenkins arrived." Sterling's confidence wavered for the first time. A video. This was an ambush. He shot a venomous glare at Mark and Brenda, who both looked like they were about to be physically ill. "Proceed," Judge Joseph commanded. The video flickered to life. The audio was clear. The courtroom watched the scene unfold, just as Alani had experienced it. They saw Mark Jenkins's placating smile, heard his condescending lecture on policy. They heard Alani's desperate professional plea about the surgery. And then came the moment that changed everything. As Mark was speaking to Alani, the camera held steady by Sarah panned slightly. It captured a clear view of the boarding line. A white man in his 50s, dressed in a golf shirt, breezed past the podium. Slung over his shoulder was a bulky, overstuffed duffel bag that was easily twice the volume of Alani's satchel. Brenda, who was standing right there, smiled and nodded at him, taking his boarding pass without a word about his luggage. The camera then panned back to another passenger, a young woman with a backpack so large it looked like she was preparing to climb Mount Everest. Again, Brenda scanned her pass and waved her through. The video continued for another 90 seconds. In that time, No fewer than 4 other passengers with demonstrably oversized bags were allowed to board without being challenged. The only person who was stopped, the only person whose bag was subjected to the sizer, was the black woman. David Chen paused the video. The courtroom was utterly silent. The visual evidence was stark, brutal, and irrefutable. Brenda Kowalski's testimony about her professional judgment and applying the rules to 1 or 2 others lay in tatters. Richard Sterling was pale. He looked at Brenda, whose face had crumpled in on itself. She was staring at her hands, tears welling in her eyes. He had been so focused on legal strategy and corporate narrative that he'd been blindsided by simple, observable fact. Judge Joseph's face was a mask of thunderous fury. He looked from the frozen image on the screen to Brenda Kowalski on the stand. His voice, when he finally spoke, was so cold it could have cracked marble. "Miss Kowalski," he said, the words falling like chips of ice. "I am going to give you one opportunity to amend your previous testimony under oath." "How many other passengers did you ask to use the sizer?" Brenda broke. A sob escaped her lips. "Just her," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Just her. And why just her?" The judge pressed his voice, rising in volume and intensity. "What was it about Dr. Davis, out of all those people, that caught your professional eye?" Brenda couldn't answer. She just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Judge Joseph turned his wrathful gaze upon Richard Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, does your client, Global Wings Air, have anything to add in its defense? Or would you like to continue explaining to me how your policies are applied uniformly and without prejudice?" Richard Sterling, for the first time in his professional career, was speechless. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was a master of words, but the video had spoken louder and more truthfully than he ever could. He slowly, stiffly sat back down in his chair. He was beaten. His case was not just lost. It was annihilated. Judge Daniel Joseph surveyed the wreckage of Global Wings Air's defense from his bench. He removed his glasses, his expression one of profound judicial weariness. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, heavy with anticipation. "In all my years on this bench," he began, his voice low, but carrying to every corner of the room, "I have rarely seen a case where the facts were so clear and the injustice so blatant. This was never about the size of a piece of luggage. It was about the abuse of petty authority and a corporate culture that either fosters or willfully ignores such behavior." He fixed his gaze on Richard Sterling, who sat rigidly in his chair. "Mr. Sterling, you spoke of policy and procedure as if they were sacred texts. But policy is not a shield for prejudice. A rule applied to one and not to all is not a rule. It is a weapon. Your employees wielded that weapon against Dr. Davis and your corporation. Through your arguments here today, sought to justify it. You came here to win, not to see justice done." His gaze shifted to Mark Jenkins and Brenda Kowalski, who both seemed to shrink under the weight of his attention. "You failed in your duty of care. You failed in your duty of basic human decency. Your actions were not a mere customer service issue. They were a profound moral failure." Putting his glasses back on, Judge Joseph looked down at the documents before him. "The plaintiff's request for a temporary restraining order is granted. However, that is insufficient to remedy the harm that has been done. Therefore, this court issues the following order under its inherent equitable powers." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom as he laid out the consequences. "One Global Wings Air is hereby ordered to secure immediate private air transportation for Dr. Alani Davis to San Francisco. I do not mean a first-class seat on your next flight. I mean a private charter jet wheels up no later than 2 hours from this moment. The airline will bear the entirety of the cost. Richard Sterling's jaw dropped. The cost would be astronomical. 2. The judge continued. Global Wings Air will arrange for a car service to transport Dr. Davis from this courthouse directly to that aircraft, and from the destination airport to UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital. All logistics will be handled by you to ensure her seamless and expedited arrival. 3. The matter of damages is not dismissed. This case will proceed, and I will be personally overseeing discovery. It was a clear threat. He was promising to put the airline's corporate culture under a microscope. 4. Mr. Jenkins and Ms. Kowalski are to be suspended from all duties pending a full internal investigation. A report from that investigation is to be delivered to my chambers within 30 days. Finally, he looked at Alani, his expression softening for the first time. Dr. Davis, you have carried yourself with a dignity that stands in stark contrast to the treatment you received. Your work is important. Go and do it. With a sharp crack of his gavel, he declared, "This hearing is adjourned." The aftermath was a blur. Richard Sterling, ashen-faced, was already on his phone, the architect of a legal disaster, now forced to become a travel agent for the woman he'd just tried to discredit. David Chen and Sarah Klein were quietly triumphant, gathering their files as they shielded Alani from the sudden media interest. Less than an hour later, the harsh reality of the courthouse was replaced by the serene luxury of a private jet waiting at Teterboro Airport. As she stepped into the plush cabin, Alani felt the dizzying shift in her reality. A deferential flight attendant offered her coffee. The flight crew, aware of the circumstances, treated her with a mixture of awe and reverence. As the jet climbed steeply into the sky, Alani looked out the window at the city receding below. She was free from the gravity of the bureaucracy that had held her captive. She pulled her satchel onto the adjacent seat, its contents, the blueprint for a child's future, finally safe. She took out her phone and made the call she had longed to make for hours. "Sharon, it's me," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I'm in the air. I'll be there in 5 hours. Tell them to keep Leo prepped. I'm coming." The flight was a quiet, surreal journey above the clouds, a moment of peace between two intense battles. Upon landing, a black car was waiting on the tarmac, ready to whisk her across the Bay Bridge. She walked into UCSF Children's Hospital, not as a victim, but as a surgeon. The stress and anger of the past day sloughed off her like a coat as her focus narrowed to the task at hand. Millimeters. Milliseconds. A child's life. Hours later, under the brilliant lights of the operating room, Dr. Alani Davis's hands were steady as she meticulously repaired Leo Petrov's tiny, flawed heart. She worked with the quiet confidence of someone who was exactly where she was meant to be, giving a young boy a future that had almost been denied by an arbitrary decision made a country away. The battle in the courtroom was over. The battle for a life was won. Dr. Alani Davis's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought in an operating room or a boardroom, but at a simple airport gate. It shows how the small, everyday acts of prejudice baked into corporate policies and individual choices can have life-altering consequences. But it's also a story of hope. It proves that one person armed with the truth and aided by unexpected allies can stand up to a giant and win. It took the courage of Dr. Davis to stand her ground, the conviction of Sarah Klein to get involved, and the integrity of Judge Joseph to see justice done. If this story of injustice, perseverance, and ultimate victory moved you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others. These stories need to be heard. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. and most importantly, leave a comment below. Have you ever faced a situation where you felt powerless against a big company? Your story matters too. Thank you for listening.